welcome back to another exciting episode of Women, Tech and Society podcast, a show where we'll focus on issues of concern for women, particularly in the tech space and in society as a whole. We'll also explore the opportunities and significant progress of women in the society, leadership position, technology, and entrepreneurship. And lastly, we'll highlight challenges that women face and how we can remain resilient in the face of setback in the society. My name is Benita Izumizu, and I'll be your host for today. On today's episode, we'll be discussing transitioning a career in tech, how women can transition into tech and still thrive in that field. On the show with me today is an amazing guest who will take us through her journey, her experiences, and perceptions of women in tech and society. She'll also share her success story and challenges that she had had to go through as a woman in tech. So let's meet my guest.
Yeah, so I am Funmilayo Obasa and I am a researcher and designer. And currently I work as a researcher for Sunda Collective. And really my journey into tech started in 2020. So ASO was on strike and the COVID pandemic was here. Nigeria was in lockdown and it felt like I was about to lose my mind because everything was stagnant. I did not know what to do, and I would see news articles. I'd read news articles about how the negotiations between ASO and the government always ended up in deadlock. So it was very frustrating, and at some point, I began to consider starting afresh in a different school, in a different country, like starting from 100 level, because at the time I was studying history and international studies and I was in
Oh,
my third year of university. And so my journey into tech, it was actually my way of reviving my interest in psychology. So what happened was that before I got into university, I wanted to study psychology, but my parents did not agree with that because of the psychology's low career prospects in Nigeria. And the compromise was history and international studies. I guess they were more fascinated about the international studies than they were about the history. But for me, history was my favorite subject in secondary school, so it wasn't that bad. And I decided to study history for that reason. But during the ASU strike, I revived my interest in psychology and I did some research and I discovered rather UX design, which also means user experience design. And I found that it is basically an intersection between psychology and human behavior and technology. And I thought that it was an interesting field to venture into. And yeah, that was how I got started. I started by reading articles, watching YouTube videos. I started by taking courses. And in 2021, I decided to focus on the research aspect of UX design because the way design is structured is that it has different specializations. There's research, there's content design, there's visual design, interface design, information architecture, interaction design. And I decided to specialize in research mostly I, because of my interest in psychology, like I mentioned, and because I prefer to understand how people think and how they behave and how those thoughts and behaviors inform the design of technology and the design of tools and services and products that we use today. Yeah, that was how I transitioned into tech.
wow. I mean, that's amazing. One common thing that I know we both have is I also studied history and international relations in my first degree. And then, yeah, so, okay, thank you so much for that. So, the next question I'll ask you, you talked about your experience, about talking about your parents were fascinated by the international relations aspect of your course, right? So would you say that your background or previous experience has directly or maybe indirectly influenced your transition into tech? So did this shape your perspective as a tech person in general?
Mm, not initially, I'd say along the way it did, but not initially. Initially, I was just focused on doing something that I loved and doing something that I was passionate about and something that interested me. But, in tech, there is the business side of it, and there is also the social impact side of technology and the part of technology that deals with international development. And what I've discovered recently is that I'm more interested in the international development aspect of it, which is closely related to my role at Sunday Collective. So basically, in the international development aspect of it, because you're designing solutions, you're not just designing solutions for people that are going to buy products, you're designing solutions for people that in different parts of the world, right? So you could be designing like a way for people in to make it easier for people in maybe Nigeria, for example, to access the healthcare system, or you could do that in another country like Kenya or Ghana. So I've found and I've realized recently that my background in history, not international relations now, but history, because the way the curriculum is structured, I went to Unilearning, and the way the curriculum is structured is the curriculum was mostly focused on history, not international studies. So the international studies was just there as a way to entice people to study the course. But what I've discovered is that my background in history plays a role the design design and research in the international development sector, because when you're designing solutions for people in different countries, you need to understand their culture, you need to understand how they behave, you need to be culturally sensitive, and you need to know those things to design solutions or services or products or whatever that will suit their needs and that will meet their needs. So my background in history plays a big role in that
Wow.
aspect.
Wow. So there is another similarity between us. I also graduated from the University of Ilorin, my first degree. Well, that's interesting. So yes, and the same course, very similar. So I understand where you're coming from. And yes, okay. So yes, thank you again for that. And then moving to my next question, which is going to focus more about perception. So so what is your current perception, basically, about or view of women, particularly in tech and society at large? And how do you think that society's impact can ease women's career transition into tech?
Yeah, so I think it's a cool thing that there are more women going into tech because, in design, there's something called inclusive design, and um, it's more or less about including groups that have been marginalized. And the inclusion of women into tech spaces is important. It's really important because, well, half of the world's population is made up of women. And if you're designing solutions that half of the world's population will use, then you need you need to include people. You need to include those people with different perspectives. And I'm aware that there's a small group, if I would say, a small group of people who are not pleased about that. Like, for example, on, okay, we're in the month of March now. It's Women's History Month. International Women's Day is coming up. And you're going to see a lot of companies and brands celebrating International Women's Day. You're going to see them um, creating and creating programs for women to learn technology skills and all of that. But on International Men's Day, it's not like that, right? Mostly people just talk about, oh, men don't cry. Sorry, men, you need to be open with your emotions and all of that. So there's a small group of people that are not pleased with that because it feels like there's this disparity. But the way I see it, it's an attempt to bridge that gap because I feel that people really do not understand why it is necessary to include women in tech and why there is, would I say, a preference right now for including women in technology spaces. Like, okay, you want me to talk about society's impact and all of that. So the thing about women is what I've discovered, and based on my experience as well, girls and boys are brought up differently, and girls and boys are conditioned differently. And so, if you, in a typical family, the boy is brought up to, be a go-getter, to lead, but the girl is supposed to be in the kitchen and subscribe to gender roles, and it's like everything in her life revolves around marrying somebody that she doesn't even know yet. And so it's quite important, these opportunities that you see on International Women's Day in the month of March, they are quite important. And I say this as a beneficiary of women in tech programs because there are some people, some women that might not have the opportunity to like learn these skills, mostly because of the roles they have to play at home. But when you see a program teaching maybe design or software development for free, then it attempts to bridge that gap, and it attempts to help those women, integrate them into the tech industry.
Well, I think you've shared a lot. You've spoken a lot about some of the limitations that women have to face in this field. And yes, I know that on Twitter I saw something recently they were fighting. Like, oh, why is it that women have so many opportunities? You hear people saying, oh, what about the boy child? And then somebody responded, and I was like, if you want to really support them, there are programs that actually support the boy child. But the truth is, you're only coming out to, maybe chase clout or something. That, oh, why is it women? So people would be like, oh, it's because this, it's because that. The truth is, are you really trying to support men, or are you just trying to chase clout? Do you understand? So yes. Anyway, don't let's go deep into that. So based on what you've said about the limitations, that will take us to our next question, which would be, as women, I know we encounter a lot of challenges from background, from childbirth, from growing up, from training, from trying to going to schools from the very basic levels. I know how sometimes we are bullied, but yes. So I would say, what challenges can you highlight some of the challenges that you think we face during our transitioning in tech? I know you transitioned, so maybe you could tell us some of the challenges using your own experience. Let us know, okay, these are some of the challenges that women that are planning to transition would likely face. And then using your experience, how did you now overcome these challenges?
Okay, well, I think in this case, it depends on the context. So I'll just use myself as an example. So when I was transitioning, um, my number one challenge was actually learning the skill sets that I needed to learn in order to transition fully into the space. And not just that, but it can feel overwhelming because you're learning on your own. You have practically no guidance. And so it's like you're just swimming in a very large pool of information. And because you're just starting out, you do not know how to distinguish between truth and misinformation. So it's quite difficult in that regard. And also, you know, I mean, this is Nigeria, and you have Nigerian parents, older Nigerians who do not really understand what's going on. And, you try to explain to them that, oh, this is what I'm doing, but they're not quite understanding. I mean, my parents were very understanding, but even though I think they didn't really understand what was going on, but I remember when I was in, I told you I started when I was in 300 level. So eventually ASU called off their strike and I went back to school. So I still had to juggle my schoolwork with my tech aspirations. And when I was in university, I was living with my grandfather. And he began to notice that, I don't know, I guess he began to notice that I wasn't really invested in my schoolwork, even though I attended classes all the time. I mean, I wasn't the kind of person that would starve classes or miss classes. I tried as much as possible to balance my tech aspirations and my tech lessons with my schoolwork. And so I guess he just one day assumed that, oh, she has lost focus. And then he decided to tell my dad, and he was like, "Oh, it looks like Funmilayo has lost focus." And I remember he called me one day, and he actually told me that because he asked me, "What do I have in store for the future?" And I told him, "Well, yes, the plan is to graduate, obviously, and then start, apply for graduate school, although not in a degree related to history." And that was just how I put it. But I remember feeling bad about it because behind the scenes, I was struggling. Really, I was struggling to balance school with tech. And at that time, there's this program, Zuri. So they were, there's this program I was part of, this Women in Tech cohort for um, up and coming UX designers. So I was doing that, and we were in the project phase, and I was leading my team. So, and we had deadlines to meet, obviously. And so I was juggling that with school and also I think I was in 400 level then, my first semester of 400 level. So that was when I was still scoping out project, my final project. And so everything was hectic. And then, someone just comes and says, "Oh, you've lost focus," when they don't know what is going on behind the scenes. So that was one of the challenges that I experienced and that I faced. And basically, the way I overcame that challenge was to assert myself and not let those words get to me. And another challenge that I think not many people talk about is, because like we're saying, there is a specific way girls are brought up, and as a girl, you're expected to, do all the housework, and you're expected to do the chores and everything. And in my case, I am the only girl, so that's a terrible, terrible, terrible experience, anyways. But people tend to underestimate how time-consuming housework is. And that should not be so. Okay, when I say people, I mean men. Yes, they tend to underestimate how time consuming housework
Chores.
is and how time consuming chores are. And if you spend all your time doing chores and housework, what time are you going to have to do your work, to take the courses you need to take? You won't have time. And it's exhausting.
Very
So
exhausting.
what I did to overcome that challenge was to set boundaries, and I had to let my parents know, although indirectly, that look, this is what I'm doing, and I cannot spend my whole day doing this, doing housework, doing chores, being in the kitchen when I have other things to do, other things that I care about.
Well, I think most women, we all have similarities in that area. But, well, for me, it was a little bit different. So when you said you're the only female, I feel it's interesting because you have, bodyguards guiding you and protecting you from whatever challenge you may face in the hands of maybe other men outside or something. But anyway, that's me just saying. Because I know I have three elder brothers and I know how much they're like, "Oh, don't do this. Can you lift this? No, you cannot lift this. Ah, you're too fragile. Don't touch this. Don't." And I'm like, "Ah." And then when I start, but the housework, no. When it comes to the kitchen, you have to wake up at 5 and then you have to do this. And then even if they decide that they want to do that, they'll tell you, "Okay, we could help you, but you have to do like the major work." So what are you doing? But anyway, it's still interesting though that I came from a family where there was understanding. Do you understand? So yes, I think for the fact that your brothers were, they are men, they would always support you and everything. But yes, that's interesting. So that'll take me to my next question, where I would so, how do you think women can leverage existing skills? I know before you actually went into tech, you probably had a little bit of knowledge or things that you were already doing. So, how do you think that women can leverage these existing skills or career from a non-tech experience while transitioning into the tech career?
Okay. Well, in any work that you do, you need to have soft skills. And well, in my line of work, I feel that the most important soft skill that you can have is curiosity and communication. Because when you are doing, like when you're designing something, oh yeah, and I should also mention that when I say design, I do not merely mean visual design or design for aesthetics. I mean functional design, like designing things that allow people to do things that they need, things that will help them achieve their goals. So when you're designing something, and when you are trying to get a sense of the people you're designing for, curiosity goes a long way in helping you achieve that goal. Because, so, if you want to understand how people do a certain things, and if you want to use that data, the information you collect from them, to inform the design of whatever you're designing, be it a service or product or tool or whatever, then you need a certain degree of curiosity to achieve that goal. Because if you don't have curiosity, you need to know how to ask the right questions. You need to know when to ask the right questions. And basically it's more about knowing how to ask the right questions at the right time, in the right way, in order to get the stories and the data that you need to inform whatever it is that you're designing. And then for communication is very important. you know we communicate every day, but what I've realized is that not many people know how to communicate properly. And I've struggled with that constantly. I still do. But if you can get your point across clearly and in a way that is relatable to people, then, I mean, that's a superpower. So skills like that, they don't necessarily have to be related to what you used to do, but communication, curiosity, they're general skills. And you need them in any work that you do, even if the work is in the tech industry.
Were there any specific skills or knowledge gaps that you identified personally? I know you had talked about a little bit of communication, soft skills, and others, but were there any specific skills that you identified when transitioning into tech that there was gap, that you had gap, and then how did you address them?
Yeah, it's UX design, research, they are very technical roles. So even, in school, you think that you're supposed to learn about, as a history student anyways, you're supposed to learn about how to do historical research. Not just the theory, but the practical aspect of it. But I mean, there was nothing like that. And you would think that, okay, if I'm doing research, then certainly there would be transfer skills I could leverage from my background as a historian, research skills, but there was nothing like that. So it felt as though I was starting afresh. So everything felt very new, and like, I had to start from scratch. Yes, so I find it difficult to like hone in on those specific skill sets that you're asking for. No, I had to start from scratch.
Okay, well, I think that also brings us to our next question, which so can you tell us a little bit about the role of continuous learning? I know you talked about you were constantly learning, trying to network and engaging with some of the programs that you had engaged with. So can you tell us the role of continuous learning and how it has impacted your transition and your career growth?
Yeah, so learning never stops. That is one thing. Regardless of what you're doing, learning never stops. And I'm going to talk about two aspects with regards to your question. So the first is learning never stops, but you can take as much courses as you want. You can read lots and lots of books, but if you do not find a way to put what you're learning, what you're reading, what you're consuming, what you're reading, watching into practice, then it's going to go away. It's
Definitely.
going to go away.
Yes,
And
definitely.
I've struggled with that a lot because when I was starting out, okay, I took like a lot of interesting courses, but putting those learnings, what I gathered into practice, practicing what I learned was very difficult. And um that was when that was where She Code Africa and Zurich came into play, because and that was where they really helped a lot, because so She Code Africa is a community of women in tech, African women in tech, and in 2021 I was part of their the fourth cohort of their mentorship program. So what I had been learning for about a no, not up to a year, but about 6 months, I was able to put into practice during the mentorship program. Same with Zuri's Women in Tech program. I think that one was in collaboration with Ingressive for Good. And I was able to put what I had been learning into practice. But even even regardless of that, it took me like a full year to fully transition into tech. Actually, it was more than a year. If it took me more than a year to fully transition into tech, because I remember so it was 2021. I had finished my project, my final project, but I also went on strike again. So I
Any
decided,
frustration?
yeah, I decided to um to start applying for jobs, and it was quite difficult for me because you know because I like I told you I'm more interested in research than I am in other aspects of design, which I'm trying to change a little bit. But most of the jobs I found on LinkedIn and on other job sites were for seniors. And even the junior roles I found, most of them were for people based in the US, the UK, Europe, not in Africa or Nigeria. So it was quite difficult. It took me a full year to like find the role that I'm currently doing now. And so that's the first aspect of learning. The second aspect is, okay, I know I've said this a lot, but yes, I do research. And the kind of research I do is not strictly academic. And in the work I do, when I started with Sunday Collective last year in 2022, so the project involved working with helping the Gates Foundation invest in digital healthcare interventions in Lagos State. And basically, what we were trying to do was we're trying to understand how women in vulnerable populations in Lagos, how they interacted with the healthcare system and how they sought healthcare. What did they do? What were their challenges? And that's another form of learning, because you're talking to people, you're talking to women, these women, and you are getting they're telling you their stories. And I think for me it was really eye-opening, because that was when I actually realized how isolated I had been, because I grew up in a very isolating environment. And I also it was those projects and the stories I heard actually made me realize how privileged I was as a Nigerian. I mean, I'm not Bill Gates, I'm not Dangote, but it made me realize my privilege. I come to terms with it. I was like, oh wow, things are happening in this country. It's like particularly to women, right? And this is not me dismissing the challenges of men, but the challenges for women are so peculiar, and sometimes when you just hear them, you're really sad. They sound really sad. It gets me upset. It upsets me sometimes, a lot of times actually. And in that process of learning about how other people interact with um, the healthcare system, more or less how people interact with the world around them and how they make sense of it, and how their culture and how their religion informs the decisions they make, the health decisions they make, the financial decisions they make. It's beautiful to learn about those things, because it's like that. It's not your life, obviously, but
Definitely.
you know it's kind of like reading a novel. Like when somebody creates a story for you to immerse yourself in, but this time it's real life. And it can be sad, it can be funny, it can be fulfilling sometimes.
Some people don't even like to pick interest in what is not their field. So it's like something new. Oh, please, I'm not going to stress my brain about that. So yeah. Okay. I heard you talking about some of the programs and benefits that you have. So can you share with us one aha? I like to call it aha moment, right? One aha moment that that is a significant success story of personal accomplishment, like what you personally accomplished, right? A breakthrough as a result of your transition into tech.
Yeah, it's still related to what I just spoke about. Like I told you that it took me like a full year to fully transition into tech. And the fact that I was able to start working with Sunday Collective in 2022, that was my breakthrough. I wrote an article, that was my highlight for 2022. It's still my highlight in 2024 because, like, it has just been.
Please tell us the name of the article so that our online viewers could, go and read the article and learn from it.
Yeah, it's on my website. Sorry, I cannot remember the title. I wrote it in 2022.
Okay, maybe we'll just drop the link so that
Yeah.
people can, yeah, please.
Yeah, um so yeah, it has just been like the experience, of interacting with people that are outside of your circle, like far, far away from your circle, from your inner circle, and using analyzing the data and then using the findings to inform the design of solutions that are supposed to help them. So it has been very eye opening, and I'm speechless,
Wow, that is a speechless breakthrough. Right. Okay. Well, please don't forget to drop your website, so that we can go through the article.
really. Yeah,
Okay.
it's funmilayoobasa.com.
Okay, Funmilayo Obasa.com. Great. Okay, so what I'm going to ask now is, I know that truth is the tech sector has high expectation when it comes to benefits, expectations, opportunities, right? So did you have these expectations when you first transitioned? Were they met? And can you share some of the lessons from your experience? So you're going to share some of the expectations that you had, and then if they were met, and then the experiences along the line.
Yeah, so I did. I had those expectations, but what I've come to realize is that a lot of people on social media over glamorize tech.
Right, over glamorize is the word.
Yes, they do. And it's social media, everyone is looking for attention. So they make it look like um, what it is not. But what I have realized is that there's a lot of groundwork. I don't want to call it dirty work, but there's a lot of groundwork that goes into working anywhere, including in the tech industry. And I should even mention that my field, I wouldn't really describe what I'm doing as wholly tech, like as completely tech, because there are a lot of, how do I describe it? There's a lot of social research that goes into it, understanding people, understanding what they need. So it's not entirely tech, but it's part of it because in the end, we're designing technology.
At the end of the
And
day.
yes, in the end, we're designing technology. So, like I said, a lot of people over glamorize tech, and I had expectations, but you know, after working in the space for how many years now? After being in space for about 2 to 3 years, 2 to 3 years, I've come to realize that those expectations are far, 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 far away from reality.
Overrated.
Yes, in some way. And what I've also realized is that most of the experiences that we hear about people working in tech are the experiences of seniors in the industry. So
Yeah.
like I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert. I'm still early in my career, like I said, 2 to 3 years. And it's a process, it's a the whole journey is about learning, and I'm not trying to rush anywhere, but I think the experience of a junior or the experience of somebody who is still early in their career is vastly different from the experience of a senior. And that matters a lot. Context matters a lot because if you're early in your career and you are seeing somebody, a senior, on social media talking about how they're making lots of money per year, and you're still early in your career, you might think that there's something wrong with you because you're not making that amount of money.
Yeah.
But there's in reality there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that's just how life is. You're still early in your career and you still need to grow. There's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of room for you to explore and a lot of room for you to fail. So those expectations are very, very unrealistic, and they often do not match the context of somebody who is early in their career.
Wow. Okay, I think with what you've said, it will bring me to my last question. As an early stage career person in tech, right? And I know you had mentioned some initiative, which is In Good, Progressive Women, She Code Africa, and some of the Zurich and some of the programs that you were a beneficiary, right? But are there other initiatives or trainings or resources or programs that were maybe pivotal to supporting your career transition? And then this one has a baby question, right? So the baby question is, in your opinion, what initiative, based on all of these programs that you have been a beneficiary, what initiative or programs do you think could, advance opportunities for women to decide, women who decide to transition into tech, especially so that we don't have the expectation of, oh, when you get into tech, there's money there. Tech is blood money. We all hear that. Tech is blood money. I heard that when I was I think in 300 level. Or no, yeah, I was in 300 and I heard, tech is blood money. Immediately, I started saving up. I used my house rent to buy a computer. The one I was given, I sold it to do something else. But when I discovered that tech is blood money, blood money, okay, we need to get into the space. And when you go into that space with that kind of expectation, it comes with imposter syndrome because when you discover you're not doing as much as you're supposed to, or you look at the people that have made it, that have been in that field for a long time, right? And you're like, oh, this person is a tech and is into tech, and the person isn't really doing much. But the person is making a whole lot of money, is making six figures, and you've been here struggling, struggling for like months without even having anything. So I want you to use your experience to, tell those people that are planning to transition into tech the initiative and programs that they could benefit from, just like you did.
The internet is saturated with a lot of information, so it's hard to be very specific. But what I have discovered is that usually, it depends. It depends on what you are, on the field you're going into. Maybe if it's design, there are specific people, leaders in the industry that churn out good content, and then there are some people who misinform their audience and give them very unrealistic expectations. So it's very hard for me to like give specific instances or specific initiatives. Very difficult for me to do so. But what I would say is if you're just starting out, just look for an expert that is look for an expert that is in your field, that is producing content, and then just stick to them. But not don't stick to just one person, because I believe that you need like different perspectives. Yeah, so just look for an expert or a group of experts and stick to them. And as you grow, you develop a filter and you'll be able to distinguish between good information and misinformation. And one other thing I would say is, because you're still early in your career, you should give yourself room to experiment. You should give yourself room to fail. And like for example now, in addition to the work I'm doing, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to explore different aspects of design, different spaces by building things, by coming up with initiatives. And the first one, it's still So this is connected to my background, very much connected to my background as a history student. And it's about, I'm thinking of building a database, no, a library of sources about African women's history. Because, frankly speaking, you don't usually, I mean, you are a history student. And so you know that the majority, most of the things they taught you in history were about men. And it's not that women did not do anything, they did, but for some reason they were sidelined. And
Focus was on the men.
yes, and okay, an example I like to give is Funmilayo Obasa. To most people, she is the first woman to drive a car, or she is Fela's mother. But she did more, much more than simply being the first woman to drive a car or simply being Fela's mother. I mean, she did more than that. She led protests. She advocated for the rights of women to vote. She was also a nationalist too. She took part in the decolonization efforts of Nigeria. She did all of that, and everything she did,
Only
yes, streamlined to the
first
first
woman
woman
to
to
drive
drive a
a car.
car or
Fela's
Fela's
mother.
mother, and that's not
Or
fair.
a fashion icon.
Yes, and that's not fair. Or Winnie Mandela. Winnie Mandela was Nelson Mandela's wife, and people usually don't talk about how she kept the apartheid movement, how she kept it going, how she kept the fire burning during his imprisonment. People don't talk about that. They just talk about, oh, Nelson Mandela, he was the one that did this, he was the one that did that, but they don't talk about Winnie Mandela. And it goes on and on and on. And so I think it's important to create that library, database, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, of sources about African women's history. So you can take that route and you can build stuff, explore, experiment, fail, and do things that will help you in the long run. Because right now, I won't lie to you, the job market is terrible. And that's because of the economy and, the Russian Ukraine war and some other factors, right? So you need to look within and think of things that you can do to keep yourself busy and most especially to practice what you have learned.
Wow. I know that when you had first mentioned research, you are a designer and research. I'm like, okay, so how does normally when people say research, it's always like, oh, academic research and but with what you've said, there is also a background to also understand what you need to do, what you have interest in, what you need to focus on, and then also the historian aspect of it, right? That involves understanding humans, their need, their want, and how to balance your transition. So if you're going to transition into tech, you have to have these basic soft skills, right? Okay, thank you very much. And with that, we've come to the end of our show. A very big thank you to my guest. Thank you, Funmilayo, for coming on my show today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to my online viewers for staying to the end. See you on the next episode. Till then, bye.